Welcome, everybody. Welcome to episode number 115 of Fraternity Foodie. I am your host, Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. We call these episodes Fraternity Foodie because there is nothing like great food to bring people together. Today, we have with us Libby Parker, a registered dietitian or a nutrition expert who loves helping people relearn how to eat intuitively. In 2019, she published an eating disorder recovery book for college students called Permission to Eat. And she also adopted a child in 2019. So besides helping people have a better relationship with food, some of her other favorite things to do, she loves to sing, she loves to dance, act. Yes, she is a musical theater geek, hopes to someday perform on Broadway. She likes to read novels, run, and drink cafe au lait with a berry scone, preferably. Welcome to the show, Libby.
Thank you so much. I love how much you do your homework for these.
That's the reaction I'm looking for when I'm talking to a guest. They're like, how did you get all this information on me?
Yeah, I didn't tell him any of that. He found it all on his own.
It was not provided. I do a lot of research before we get into an interview like this. I'm just so excited to talk to you because I think you're absolutely fantastic, and you're really perfect for college students. And the topic, I mean, talk about timely. Wow, it's the perfect time to talk about it. Let's give our audience a little bit of background on you. I know that you decided on the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities, for your undergraduate pursuit of nutrition. I'm wondering what made this institution the right choice for you?
Ooh, I'm going to try to give you a shorter version because it was quite the path to becoming even a nutrition major in general. So I actually started at the University of Wisconsin River Falls for my first 2 years of college, and my original plan was to become a veterinarian. Large animal, equine was what I was really going for. And sometime in my first semester of college, I came to the conclusion that I'm good at science, but I don't want to get called out in the middle of a blizzard, which is a big thing in Minnesota and Wisconsin, to go out and stick my arm up a horse's butt. What can I do with people? So that led me into, what other jobs are in the sciences. I didn't want to be a doctor or anything like that. And at the same time, unbeknownst to me, I was in the midst of my own restrictive eating disorder. So I was obsessed with food. I was obsessed with counting calories and reading all the nutrition facts and all that stuff. And I saw there was this job called a dietitian. Didn't really know what it was. And I'm like, cool. There's someone who just like spends all day learning about food. And at the time I was like, ooh, I'm gonna help people lose weight and all that stuff. That was really my eating disorder talking. And my college did not offer nutrition as a major. So my career advisor helped me figure out a school that had nutrition major. It was University of Minnesota Twin Cities, which I originally did not apply to, but I was I think I finally was at a point in my life where I was ready to go to the big city. My dad had done his PhD there, so my family was very familiar and comfortable with the university, and it ended up being just the most incredible experience. My best friends were from there. I cannot say enough great things about the University of Minnesota.
That's great. It sounds like the perfect match. So that worked out really well for you. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Now, I mean, so our audience understands. I mean, you've done a ton of work as a health advocate, a registered dietitian for eating disorders, a public health nutritionist, a health coach, a personal trainer. What drives you to make such a big impact in all of these specific areas?
Yeah, well, they all built on each other. So my current job, I'm the owner of a group private practice called Not Your Average Nutritionist, and we're registered dietitians helping people recover from or prevent eating disorders. And that wasn't what I initially planned on becoming, although it is truly where my passion lies now in helping people have a great relationship with food and with their body. But again, when I was in college and in the midst of my own disorder and becoming overly obsessed with exercise and all that stuff, I was like, well, if I'm going to be working in nutrition, I should probably focus on the whole body. And I was, again, getting into my own exercise, not having really been in sports when I was younger, and decided to go for a personal training certification. So I held that certification for 8 years. I've actually let that one go. And that opened a lot of other doors. So fast forward, finished college. By the end of college, I pretty much worked myself out of the eating disorder, which is not typical, but that's one of the things I really loved about the University of Minnesota is our professors were so amazing. And what I learned, and I think my innate understanding of science and how much I truly believe in the objective facts of science is like, oh, your body needs this many calories to survive because these bad things will happen. Sugar is not evil. Like all these things that we learned in our classes really moved me forward in this stance so that I was in a really good place by the end of college. So then I get out, I do my internship, get my RD, and so I'm a registered dietitian and a personal trainer, which allowed me to get some of my first jobs as a public health nutritionist with the county, where I was going out and doing presentations and classes for schools and community centers, where I was literally like guest teaching their physical education and nutrition classes. I was not trained to teach phys ed, but I was like going to sixth grade classes, and they'd have me come in for a day a week and teach their class, which was really funny to me. Doing both nutrition presentations and movement, and then that led into both jobs teaching at a community college and getting a health coaching position at, of all places, a nuclear power plant. I'm probably one of the only dietitian, maybe the only dietitian that has any understanding of nuclear energy. It was a fantastic job, but really weird. So having that background where you can really have that wraparound service of nutrition and movement, because they go so intrinsically together, really opened a lot of doors for me. And each job kind of built on each other to get me to where I am now.
It's so fascinating, this whole progression that you've been through. Let's talk about eating disorders in particular. Why
Mm-hmm.
is college such a big time for eating disorders?
That is such a great question because, of course, eating disorders can occur at any point in life. We've seen 6-year-olds with eating disorders. We see 90-year-olds that still have their eating disorder. We're seeing a lot more popping up in middle-aged women in particular, but college and really anytime post-puberty to mid-20s is really the sweet spot where they're popping up. And I actually wrote in my book, which is called Permission to Eat, a practical guide to working yourself out of an eating disorder during college while celebrating the awesomeness that is you. I want to read a couple paragraphs from that because I talk about literally this question you asked. So let's get specific. Why in college in particular, or why is college in particular such a big time for eating disorders? Well, there are 4 things I've come to realize. 1, college is a major life transition, especially if the person is living away from home for the first time. College students may feel out of control with all the changes happening in their lives, and their food choices may seem like the only thing they have control over. And for the first time, they have complete autonomy about what foods they choose to buy instead of whatever was at home or put in front of them. Number 2, college age comes shortly after puberty, hence a normal time for eating disorder development. During this time, hormones and body changes can leave people feeling like they don't belong in their own body. This is even harder for people who are misgendered by others, so trans, gender fluid, non-binary. Developmentally speaking, this stage following puberty is very egocentric, so they're in that me mentality, making people believe that everyone is looking at and judging them. Number 3, the pressure of college, whether self-imposed or parental, can cause feelings of inadequacy. Striving to achieve the perfect diet or body can create a sense of accomplishment for certain individuals. Food can also be used as a form of self-punishment for not feeling good enough or worthy of care. And last 4, though not true for everyone, another reason for eating disorder development is the aversion, whether or not it's a conscious thought, to growing up and dealing with normal adult things like bills, laundry, scheduling appointments, etc. The eating disorder is a way to revert back to needing to be cared for like a child or experiencing the childhood the person never really had.
Wow. All right, so now everybody in my audience is going to rush out and buy your book, of course, because that
Let's
is
hope
just
so.
spot on.
Buyamazon.com.
I would run to Amazon and go pick that up. So, one of the things why I like working in the fraternity and sorority community and why it should be the safest place on a college campus is that you have other students that are looking out for the students that are living in the chapter house or the people that they're around. So it's not just you're an individual student and you have no relationship to those around you. And so where I'm going with all of this is that we should be able to see eating disorders within our fraternity brothers, our sorority sisters. And so I'm wondering, what does an eating disorder look like so that way students on campus can recognize it when they see it?
That is a super important question because eating disorders don't have a physical look to them, which when I speak, a lot of times I'll ask the audience as one of my first questions, when you think of an eating disorder, what do you picture? And inevitably, someone is going to answer a emaciated young white girl.
Mhm.
That is such a tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of what we see as an eating disorder. Eating disorders affect people of all sizes, genders, races, everything. So we can't look at someone and say, oh, they have an eating disorder, because most people walking around with eating disorders look completely normal. They're at a objectively healthy body weight. So we can't use physical appearance as the defining feature. Of course, there are those people on the extremes that you're going to be like, oh, well, they have very severe anorexia or something, but that is for a professional to diagnose, not just some Joe on the street walking around.
Mhm.
So what we're really looking for is behaviors and mindset around food. So how are they talking about food and their body? I find it so common, and like we see it, and I reference this in my book too, like we reference in popular movies like Mean Girls, women get together and body shame themselves. So one person will be like, oh, this doesn't look good on me, or I look fat or whatever. And then the person next to them, because of that comment, be like, oh yeah, well, my so-and-so is so bad or whatever. And it'll just keep trickling down. So everyone gets this, they start talking negatively about themselves because someone else started it. So I don't want to say that in and of itself is an eating disorder trait, but it can be a precursor to developing one for sure. The more we talk negatively about ourselves and about others' bodies. So I want to say before we get into symptoms, just don't talk negatively or talk about people's bodies, your own body weight, etc. What we do see as signs and symptoms would be frequently skipping meals or doing extreme diets. You know what? I even have a whole list in here so I don't forget some stuff.
Sure.
There are so many things that could be an eating disorder, so just a small sampling.
Mhm.
You're thinking about food really frequently, so more than 2 hours a day you spend consumed thinking about food. You're calorie counting or obsessed with quantifying food, so quantifying macronutrients, weighing your food out, knowing exactly how many calories you're consuming, especially if you're like trying to cap it at something. You can't take days off of exercise, even if you're injured or sick. That can be obsessive exercise, which is not a specific eating disorder, but often plays into it. You're using food as a way to numb out, whether it's eating too much so you feel so full that you numb out, or eating so little that your hunger creates a numbing out sensation so you don't have to think about whatever stressors are really bothering you. Your choices of what you're eating become fewer and fewer. So oftentimes we see people with eating disorders eating the same exact meals every day, or having a really limited pool of foods that they'll eat from because they're safe and maybe they already know what the calories are or something like that.
Mhm.
They'll compensate for their eating by having to work it off, vomiting, using diet pills or laxatives, all of which really don't work for weight loss, by the way, but people are doing that because there's that pressure to get it out. Um, could be chewing a lot of gum or consuming a lot of low or no calorie foods or beverages. So people who are just downing tons of water or coffee instead of eating, that's definitely not good. Um, Something that doesn't sound disordered, but I see it a lot, is becoming vegetarian or vegan for the wrong reason. So I have no problem with vegetarian or vegan diets when done for the right reasons and when, used appropriately and you're eating all the different foods, but a lot of people use it as a socially acceptable way to restrict further. So that's definitely something to be watching out for.
Mhm.
Guilt or shame around eating is really big. Hiding food. So maybe your roommate, you find a whole bunch of wrappers that you never saw them eat, or things like that, or people not wanting to go out to eat with you and instead eating at home all the time and avoiding a lot of social things.
Got it. That is very full. I appreciate all that information. I think that is exactly what I was looking for there. You also mentioned in the book something called eating disorder denial. What is that?
Yeah, so most people, when they're in their eating disorder, don't realize they have a disorder or they don't realize it's as bad as it is. So they think that they're fine, that they're the exception to the rule, that what they're doing isn't bad or isn't that bad because someone else is worse. And it's really a detrimental piece. So the eating disorder is a mental health issue and it is telling the person that they need to do these things, and it's kind of like having a little devil and angel on your shoulders. So the eating disorder is that little devil, like, oh, you need to keep doing this, you're fine, we need to go harder. The angel is what I think of as like your healthy self being like, we're actually hungry, we should probably do something about this. And you get to a place where that eating disorder devil voice gets so loud that you don't even hear the healthy self anymore, and it's just like, oh, this is just normal, this is fine.
Hmm. Okay, got it. Now, the book, Permission to Eat, I look at it as a practical guide to recovery from these eating disorders. So, what tools can men and women who are listening to us right now, what tools can they use to break up with this disorder?
Oh, that is going to really vary based on what they're specifically dealing with. But I think some of the big overarching goals are really making peace with food and allowing all foods. My stance and any eating disorder professional stance is that all foods are neutral and the only ones you should avoid are if you have allergies to them, if you have, very specific religious or ethical reasons that are not because of your eating disorder. That's really the only time you should be avoiding any certain foods. And there are a lot of specific tools and activities to do in the book to start working yourself out of different habits, such as purging or calorie counting or binging and having your trigger foods around. That's all going to really vary depending on what your behaviors are.
Mhm. Also, another thing that you bring out in the book that I think is also really important, if college students are looking to get the best care in their college community, and hopefully they are for eating disorders, what information specifically should they be sharing with other health professionals?
That's a great question. Um, Well, I would first like to point out all colleges should have a health center on campus, right? So if you don't know where else to go, first check them out, tell them what I'm going to tell you to mention to them, and
Mhm.
they will hopefully connect you with eating disorder providers in your community. But what we really want to make sure whatever healthcare providers we're talking to, whether it's a doctor, a dietitian, a mental health professional, there are certain things that we do want to bring up because not everyone is going to ask the correct questions. So you want to let them know any behaviors that you are dealing with around food or exercise or body image because they can't, again, eating disorders don't have a look, so they're not going to be able to tell just looking at you or doing a physical assessment necessarily that this is what's going on. So you need to be upfront with this is how much I am eating, these are my behaviors, um, this is how much I'm exercising, I don't take rest days, I'm having joint pain, whatever it is you're doing, you need to be very upfront about that. And I have lots of examples and worksheets in the book of specific things that you can tell your providers. But the biggest thing is you need to be your own health advocate because they're not going to ask all the right questions. I mean, when I was in the midst of my own eating disorder and didn't know it was a problem, my doctor was like, "Oh, you're a nutrition major? Are you eating enough calcium?" And I said, "Yeah." I don't know if I actually was. I wasn't really paying that much attention because it was just all about like, ooh, how low can I go on everything? So, and I wasn't going to tell that to her. So I was like, yeah, yeah, I'm good. And she didn't question me anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Now, she was not an eating disorder expert, but that's why it's really important that if you want to get help, and I really hope that you do want to get help if you're experiencing any of this, that you need to be upfront. Because if I had told her, no, I'm not eating enough calcium, I'm not eating that, this is how much I'm eating, and she would have been like, whoa, that's not enough.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully she would have said, whoa, that's not enough. And, maybe we would have gotten a little further. Similarly, something that comes up a lot, and I'm talking a lot about restriction today because that was my experience and that's a lot of my students' experience. But of course, there's all different types of eating disorders. But I also remember really specifically when I was 21 in the midst of all of this, and I was having chest pain. And I remember one night calling the emergency room saying, should I come in for this? And they're like, oh, you're 21, you're too young for a heart attack. It's probably just stress, you're fine. And I kept persisting and I went and got a chest x-ray and they're like, you're fine, you're young, you're just anxious. It's like you're trying to take on the world. And knowing what I know now is that I might have actually been really damaging my heart and I was just really lucky that nothing bad ever happened because the anorexia nervosa, so the very restrictive disorders, had the highest rate of mortality of any psychiatric illness. And it's primarily because of sudden cardiac death. Because when you're restricting your intake so much, you're not giving yourself enough calories to even eke out another heartbeat. And so your heart slows down, it gets weaker, it's not pumping the blood around, and eventually it could just give out.
Wow.
So that's why it's really important to be getting medical checks to be on top of what your resting heart rate is, because that's going to be really important to know.
That's great information. Thank you for sharing all of that. You also mentioned earlier, you talked about exercise without any rest days. And so I'm interested in that as well. If the treatment team that we're seeing asks us to cut back on all of this exercise that we're doing, how do we handle that and start to actually love our body instead of constantly shaming it?
Oh, yes. And that is a very real possibility that your treatment team is going to ask you to cut back on exercise. I've seen people handle this in a lot of different ways. Some are just flat out, no, I can't do that because, it becomes such a part of you.
Sure.
And for so many people, for better or worse, like this, it can be a very healthy way to relieve anxiety, exercise.
Mhm.
Um, but our bodies do require rest days to recuperate. If we actually want to get stronger, faster, better, whatever our goals are with exercise, we need to allow our muscles to recuperate. So when someone is asking you to reduce or stop exercising, it really is in your best interest. We don't like telling people to not exercise. It's not fun for the providers. We know that you're obsessed with it. We know you love it. And we know that in appropriate amounts, exercise is very healthy, of course. But if we're asking you to cut back, that means that you're at risk of seriously hurting yourself to a point where you might never be able to exercise again.
Mm.
So that's when you really have to dig deep and think about, why am I doing this? If you are reaching out to professionals for help, something in you, even if this is really hard, something in you is showing up, is saying that this is important to me. Even if you're not taking action right now, you are going to the appointments, you are hearing what people are saying. That always tells me that this is important to you. Why is it important to you? The first thing I will ask my clients to do is write out their why statement for recovery. Why do you want to recover? Why is this important? What will it afford you in the future that you can't currently do now? So if you're running every day and you have to run because your eating disorder is compelling you, whether for anxiety, for weight loss, for whatever it is that it's telling you, I'm guessing that you're having to go more hours, longer distances, whatever, as time goes on, just to maintain that same level of keeping that voice at bay. At some point, that is really interfering with the rest of your life. It means that you can't do other things. You're missing out on social engagements. You're not able to do your classwork as well. You're probably starting to develop fractures. There's all these different things that, without getting to like the medical extremes, are just interfering with your life. So, do you want to have good relationships with people, with significant others, friends? Do you want to be able to go to social events? Do you want to succeed in school and career? Do you want to have a life? Do you want to keep doing this activity for the rest of your life? Like, if you want to be a runner, and I'm just using running as an example, it can be whatever, but if you want to be a runner and maybe you want to run a marathon someday, running every single day is not going to get you there, and in fact is probably going to ruin your chances at that. So when we're asking you to take a step back, think about what you can gain from removing or reducing your exercise. What else will that bring into your life rather than what are we cutting out?
Got it. That's a great way to look at it. And the other thing I like about the book is, I mean, you've obviously spoken to so many college students on this particular topic. So, from all the information that you've gathered and all the people that you've spoken to, what are the hardest things about recovery?
Oh, so many things. I think I'm just going to go with the biggest one that people don't necessarily verbalize, but I know it's the hardest part. Eating disorders are not about food. They're not even about body. They're not about exercise. They are a coping mechanism for something else going on in your life. So while food is not an addictive substance, people use eating disorders like someone who is an alcoholic or abuses drugs. It's considered a process addiction, so the addiction is to the behavior. And it's, as we mentioned earlier, often a way of numbing out and not dealing with other things in life. So when you're in the midst of your disorder, you can push away hard things in life. You don't have those difficult conversations. You don't do all the things, or even if you are, you're able to numb out enough that you don't have to keep mulling over them. You're focused on the behavior, the food. So when we are, I don't want to say ripping away the eating disorder, but when we are getting rid of that eating disorder, all of a sudden it's like the floodgates open. People's emotions are coming back because they've numbed their emotions so much, and we think, oh, well, you get to numb out all the bad stuff. Well, you're also numbing the joyful emotions. So your emotional range is very tiny, and we're reopening you to feeling everything, which is so hard when you've been avoiding it for so long. And it can open up a lot of wounds, a lot of past traumas that people have to now deal with. And if we don't replace the eating disorder with another good coping mechanism, for a lot of people, it can be something like journaling or, going for a walk in a way that's not obsessive or whatever. If we don't replace it with something else, the eating disorder is either going to come screaming back, or you're going to go into probably another type of addiction. We see a lot of flip-flopping back and forth between eating disorders and, substance abuse or things like that. For people who haven't dealt with the underlying stuff and developed other good coping mechanisms. So it's really important as you're working through that to think about, what can I replace this with in a healthy way?
Love it. That is great information. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And to be quite honest with you, obviously the name of the podcast is Fraternity Foodie. So, my first
Oh,
confession is
perfect.
I love, love, love good food. And, you know, in a normal atmosphere, obviously we're living now in this pandemic, but in a normal atmosphere, I would be trying new restaurants in every single city, every single college town that I speak in. I mean, that's just what I do. That's what I look forward to, is trying these new foods. So I'm just wondering, when you're in the mood for a great meal, where do you usually go? Let's say in the San Luis Obispo, California area where you're at.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. There's so much good food here. I mean, that's one
Mhm.
of the best things about college towns is that there's usually quite a few options. So I'm going to give you a couple.
All right.
So my go-to coffee shop is one of our local ones. They have, I think, 3 locations now. It's called Black Horse Coffee. They have amazing oatmeal scones and great coffee, of course. So I would definitely go there for coffee. And then for meals, I really love a place called Okimomo. It's Asian fusion.
Nice.
And they have so many great things. I always love sushi, so there's a lot of great sushi places.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my gosh, I could go on and on. There's just so many. I'm gonna leave it at that because I will just keep listing things. But yeah, please come here and have food sometime.
Absolutely. I'm very jealous. See, living in Nashville, Nashville is great food. We have great barbecue. I'm not going to complain about the food scene in Nashville because it really is delicious. But as far as sushi and fresh fish, I mean, forget it. Just don't even go there. I'm going to your place. I'm going to California to get it
Yes,
because that is the right place to get sushi. So that is awesome. And I'm now
that was definitely
discovering
an
that you love.
upgrade from Minnesota.
And I now have discovered that you love scones just about everywhere you go. So that's like a
Uh-huh.
big thing in your life.
I am a scone connoisseur. Fun fact, my very first, what I'll call real job, like basically I wasn't working for myself, making allowance. Excuse me. I was an assistant at a bed and breakfast, and so I got to learn to make scones, and I would make scones for the breakfast the next morning, in addition to doing yard work and changing the sheets. So it's been a long time love of mine. Just the way to my heart is through scones.
I love it. I would have probably eaten all the profits had I been making the scones, but hey, I mean, just being real with you.
Yep.
All right. So if college students are listening right now, let's say they want to learn more about all the services that you offer. You have a support group, you have the one-on-one nutrition counseling. Obviously, your book is on Amazon. You speak on college campuses to fraternities, sororities. So where should they go to find all of this information about you, your organization, and to connect with you?
Yes. So you can find absolutely everything on my website. It is notyouraverage.nutritionist.com. And you can find me on Instagram at dietitian Libby.
This has been absolutely fantastic. Libby, thank you so much. You've helped so many students with this interview. You have absolutely no idea. So thank you so much for the work that you do. I think it's super important. It's a very relevant conversation for college students. So just, I want to say thank you and just say that I appreciate you for everything that you do.
Thank you so much, Michael. This is a really fun podcast.
Awesome. Well, listen, it was a pleasure having you. To our audience, if you like Libby's conversation, please like and share this with other friends, sorority sisters, fraternity brothers, other people that are interested in this topic of nutrition, eating disorders, obviously very, very important stuff for college campuses. So please share it, and hopefully we'll see you on another episode of Fraternity Foodie. Bye for now.
Bye.